Welcome everybody to Mentor Time. I'm excited about this topic. We're all about having evidence-based results. The reason that I wanted to talk about this topic is I've noticed more and more people are talking about their expertise and using discussions of their evidence-based experience. It seems that you're missing some opportunities that I hope I can help remind you of about your visibility, because we work on this, on your professional presence, so that you become visible, so you get known and noticed for the contributions you make. But those contributions are in places that I think today, you may have heard me talk about some of these before. I repackaged it and I put it in a different process to remind you of where we have the opportunity and need to be showing and be consistent about our expertise in bite-sized chunks. So we always start with sort of the state of the art, and where we are right now is you all have the expertise and you've all worked with Ron and me to define it and are using it a lot. But let's use it. I'm hoping that many of these things are new to you or will refresh for you. Oh, okay, I can pay attention to that with not much effort. That's why I call it bite-sized chunks. I'm not asking you to write a scientific article or a long blog post. And as always, we end with, what does this mean for you? And in your case, in this case today, I'm going to be talking to you about what you should do and give you a way to plan to go forward. So we'll get started with, you have your expertise and we've defined it. So let me refine it for you. Let me remind you of the places you'll be looking and thinking about. This is the updated version from a couple months ago of the BioPara. The instructions are still basically the same. I've been talking for a few months about making it maybe a sentence or two shorter, but right now it's still 6 sentences. But I have a whole lot of examples in the BioPara now that are different levels of expertise. That's not what I want you to focus on. I want you to focus on the fact that you've worked in many ways with Ron and me to be able to express all or parts of your BioPara, and you'll see about using that in just a minute. The other area that's full of your expertise and your evidence is your long CV. The evidence-based results from your jobs, we've worked on those. You all have worked hard on your intellectual property. You've identified it, aggregated it, and categorized it. Reminder that your intellectual property, for most of us who are knowledge workers, we do things that we transfer knowledge, we use our knowledge, we collaborate together. And the products of the writing, the products of that is writing something or speaking something, sharing something, talking about something. And then from your BioPara, the last part of it is all the other things on your long CV, what I call your unusualities, awards and honors, sports. I labeled this differently. I used to have arts and sports, but I realized in a couple people I'm working with right now in a membership group who are doing the course specifically for them, there are people who are dance experts, who are experts in their division at a sport. So it's more than just I'm a runner or I'm a biathlete. It's physicality and movement in some fashion, a large view of arts for me. Travel and languages, we all know how we've talked about the way in which we can show what we do in those. Fellowships and internships. This isn't everything, but this is most of what you want to think about and find ways to use, which leads us now to let's use it. All right, the BioPara. This is for all sorts of introductions. You may have seen this. This is in the course. I've used it in some talks that I've given. And if you've been with me for a long, long time, like a couple of you who are on the call today, you may not have seen it, but we've talked through it. The first sentence, that's your brief introduction. If you're in an in-person or online networking event, or someone says, let's do introductions around the room, that one sentence should be able to encapsulate and give people enough of a sense of what you're doing. I know it is, not should be, it will be. Sentences 1 to 3 then are your introduction when someone says, tell me about yourself. Commonly, you use this in an interview, and this helps you keep to a 60 to 90-second introduction, because part of what you do is make sure it includes one evidence-based result of how and in what way you've been able to contribute your expertise. And the longer part of your bio para is what we just talked about. If someone says, oh, that's very interesting, tell me more about you, then you pull out your unusualities. Pull out more evidence-based results, sure, but you could also say, for example, as someone did, I carried a full course load at school. I was also the captain of a Division II baseball team. This is a woman. I don't even know whether Division II was high or low. I assume it's high. But her point was, and she was in a band at the university. So we use that as a way for her to talk about time management, that she could carry a course load and do these other things, for example, as well as leadership. So when I talk about bite-sized chunks, I want to talk about what you're going to be showing and where you're going to be showing it. First thing is in your LinkedIn headline, and also probably on your resume and CV, because I've now started recommending that after your heading contact information, you put your preferred job title before you put your bio para in, and that's getting there. We're all getting to that. Here are some examples of people that are on LinkedIn that I follow, and I just took the first part of their headline, which gave me an idea of, oh, that's what they're known for. That's their career focus. And then, because two of us on here have headlines that illustrate this, Peter always lets me use him. Peter changed his headline a year or so ago, specifically to focus on being a health system strengthening specialist. And then he talks about who he serves. For me, and mine isn't exactly a model because I'm not looking to focus on getting a job for a certain thing. But what I do is I lead with Sue Mentors so that people recognize and associate it with my name. And Sue Mentors actually says, as you all know, what I do. The second place is in your About section for LinkedIn. The About section is the section that I recommend to everybody, Ron and I, when we work with you, you put your bio para in there. Can you change it and follow advice from other LinkedIn experts? Absolutely. But most of the people that Ron and I work with are busy and have other jobs, and they don't have time to spend a whole lot of time on LinkedIn. So if you plunk your bio para in there, you're already going to have work to make sure the first 2 to 4 lines have impact in them. So here are 2 different people who've said, please feel free to share my information, which is why you see a name in there. So in the first one, immediately we see what this person works on. Even before, it turns out she did have numbers that she could put into her first 4 lines. Hiram, the second one, you can see that he talks about what he's doing. Even though he's new in his experience, we see that he's served more than 100 Latino community members. So you can, again, get impact in there. Remember, it doesn't have to be a number. It's adjectives and like several or frequently you did something, often, period. There's a whole lot of ways we've talked about these before, but something that shows people the way in which your work, your expertise carries forward. I think we've had at least 2 times in the topics when I scanned them over last week, looking at seeing where I might have brought this up, 2 times that we've talked about chat box real estate. And by that, when you are in a video meeting webinar where the chat box is open, whether you can unmute and contribute or not, where you're listening to someone, I want to remind you that chat box real estate is open for the whole time of your webinar, 30 minutes, 1 full hour, an hour and a half, 3 hours. In my not scientific, but somewhat research focused mind, over the last year, I have watched how few people out of all the attendees bother to make any contributions. So I'm going to show you 2 ways. The first is what I call reflective commenting. And by this, you are substantiating and reflecting back what the person talking said that was important to you. What do people mostly do? If they write anything at all, they say, oh yeah, I agree with you, Sue. And when people are looking at that because the person's moved on, they're thinking, I don't get it. What was she referring to? So I gave you an example. In this also, because this helps substantiate for you what was important to you and is your own self-reflective practice of writing it down, I said to whoever was talking, important point. You definitely should tailor, or you should tailor a resume for each job, which is what that person had been talking about. The second is your experience contributions. I frequently, probably once a month, get someone contacting me who says, I liked what you put in the chat box typed in the chat at some recent meeting. I'd like to ask you about mentoring, or I'd like more information on something. And what those contributions from my part usually are is something that I haven't learned, and I don't do improv, but I've heard about it and people talk about it and comedians talk about it. And it's the yes and. So when comedians are doing ad lib improv and they're taught to say after a person made a comment, yes, meaning I hear you, and stop the connection, and then take it another direction or comment. For you, that's where you put your experience. So in my case, I would have said something like, I had a similar experience that mentees told me the biggest learning from them was the way that they could define their value using intellectual property or something. That's long, but you get the idea that you contribute something that's adjacent. It doesn't have to match exactly. My mentoring is just examples from mentees, or sometimes I'm on research or evaluation types of work, and I talk about responses we've had for surveys, or how the global world of surveying has changed with more electronic and virtual access, for example. It shows you in your best light. And as I said, it's a captive audience who are, the eyeballs are seeing that. But remember, a lot of times meeting host will share the chat with people, or if you're on a LinkedIn Live, the comments that people are making during the presentation are always there, and that's even more evergreen than a chat file shared with people. So you have a captive audience is my message to you all. Again, you can see why I'm stressing bite-sized chunks. It doesn't take a lot of energy to make a huge LinkedIn post, which brings me to my last point. Substantive commenting in LinkedIn and other social media, Instagram, Twitter in the old days. Most of us are moved over to Threads or Mastodon or elsewhere, in whatever way you want. And although I don't write many posts on the kind of content I'd like to be sharing more on LinkedIn, I will take the time, as I did recently with this person. Lorraine Lee posted about asking about how to ask for mentoring help. I wrote 3 short, but 3 paragraphs about what I know, what I'm finding, and how and in what way I help people who want mentoring help, who say, can you mentor me, in a DM? That's very common what I get. Helping them understand that the more information they give me and others up front, the more likely they are to get a message back. So you see that you're demoing your expertise in short, concise ways that still stay out there and get people able to see what you're doing. So what should you do? I reframed these examples into a process. of level of effort. And none of these take a huge amount of effort. It's not like writing a post or a LinkedIn article, which is even harder. Here's how I captured it. The one time or rare is when you put your title, your desired title, your expertise in your headline and in your about section. So say 2 years from now, Peter decides that he now is going to be able to, or a year from now, add more about working domestically in a regional government position in the United States. So that's why I called it one time or rare. It's not something you think about doing all the time. It's the easiest because it's a one time or rare event. Still easy, but ongoing are using your expertise in bite-sized chunks for introductions. And then the area I just spent the biggest amount of time, the chat box real estate, making reflective commenting so you can share your learning, cement your learning in your own brain while helping others cement an important point that the presenter made. And your experience contributions where, again, it's easy to write 1 or 2 sentences about experience you've had that mirrors, matches, is adjacent to what the presenter's talking about. Whoops, I forgot to click. All right, there's the second one. And then more effort, but again, not as much as writing an article, is substantive commenting. The easiest way to think about substantive commenting in posts, and for LinkedIn, we know it's 8 to 12 words, or at least it was when Richard Vanderblom did an algorithm analysis in June. It may be changing soon. But substantive commenting means at least 1 full line, 1 full sentence. So if someone gets an award or graduates or gets a new job, don't just say, congratulations, Sue. I know that your expertise in X, your epidemiology, which is not me, so in Susan, I know, Susan, your expertise in epidemiology will really be of benefit in the new position that you're moving into at wherever. So it takes a little bit more work to think about structuring it to show their assets that you see them as, how you see these people and their expertise. But by doing that, you're also seen as a substantive commenter. LinkedIn values that, their algorithm values that, but you stand out. If you've ever looked at congratulations posts, it's always congratulations, well deserved, congratulations, that's great. And then I'll come in with a line or a line and a half. So I am going to stop there and ask Ron for comments. This was a shorter presentation today. Instead of making you all think a whole lot, I wanted to give you ways to use what you're already doing. Ron.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I'm not looking for a job or anything like that, but the number of times in the last little while when I say I'm working with you, doing mentoring, immediately there's sort of an impression as to what that means. And often it's the wrong impression because there's a thinking that, oh, what expertise are you sharing, as though I have some sort of professional niche that I'm doing. And so I'm sharing that. So my particular niche is training. And so I might be mentoring somebody who is also in training. But that, of course, isn't really what we're doing. I'm not helping other trainers become better trainers. Rather, I'm working with you to help others to get their professional presence in line and so on. And that's the form of mentoring. So I have found myself having to do exactly what you've been describing more and more, because I find myself talking about it. People will say, what are you doing in retirement? This comes up, and that's how it happens. So the kinds of things you're talking about, I find myself doing. Thanks, as always, for the guidance, and I get to learn stuff too.
Yes, we all do. And thank you, Nada. Nada and Hepzibah, welcome. I love that Nada, who said she used to be silent in webinars, that reflective commenting is new to her. I think that's why I like these things, these aspects of expertise, because we don't think about ways it's out there virtually, all the little virtual trails around the rest of the internet. Anybody else have any comments? Please feel free to unmute, and on or off camera is fine, whichever works for you.
Sue, when you were talking about the chat box participation, I'll often try to get a question in kind of as early as I can. In hope sometimes they'll ask you to come on and say your question, or they'll talk to you directly. It's a little bit of a way to be seen in a webinar in which I'm not a presenter, people can't get to recognize me. And especially if you're in the same circles, you start to see somebody over and over again, and they might, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He asked an interesting question in the last one. That's a good way to try and get yourself in there too.
I love that. I love that. Love that. Love that. That's perfect. Because in many ways, asking a question is using your expertise, even if it's feels like it's not. If you say, oh, would you be able to clarify more on X? It at least sets out this is a curious person who's trying to understand, who's listening, who's taking in what the presenter has said. Love that, Peter. Thank you. And by the way, if any of you want model posts for how to write a short post about what someone else is doing, I thank Peter. He's done it probably 4 or 5 times in the last 6 weeks, even with his big move that he's just made, talking about MentorTime sessions that Ron and I hold and things like that. Anybody else have questions, comments, things that you've done that you find effective, or tell us about what's been successful for you in any of these?
While others are gathering their thought, I'm just going to comment on Peter's comment.
Right.
And that is, I recently attended a webinar and there were over 1,000 participants.
Ooh.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, and it does have a question and answer section. The chat box isn't there, but there's a question and answers thing. And so a lot of people just use that real estate to just announce their presence as opposed to actually asking real questions. But the questions that show up at the top, eventually in the webinars I've been attending, they try to actually address them in the webinar. And so I think what Peter's saying there's some real value. Get in early, and then because it'll show up at a certain point in the list. Because I know when they were looking, they're saying we had another question, and then they're going through it. If there's 1,000 participants, and they might have 700 comments, and so it's hard for them to find that sort of stuff. So doing something like what Peter says strikes me as being very good use of the real estate.
All right. Thank you, Amanda, for the meta example you gave. Amanda just commented, this is a great place to practice our reflective commenting. And that's exactly right. That's even more than meta. That's okay. I'm going to remind you. Sue, you could have said, put your own stuff in here. Yeah, I was reflecting the other day on why I can help other people do things I can't do myself easily. And that's I think what we all find, which is what Ron and I love about working with all of you, because Ron and I learn from each other as well as all of you. Anybody else have any other examples or comments for those who are able to unmute?
I don't, if it's okay if I go, I don't want to step over somebody else. I've actually found a lot of enjoyment in providing a really nice, thoughtful comment when somebody has a job success or promotion or something. It's a feel good moment, right? Not only is it promoting me, but at the same time, and more importantly, it's a feel good moment. And I've actually found that it's been a really nice way for me to slowly make my way back into somebody else's world. I may not have seen them in ages. I may not have talked to them in 20 years, but if I give them that very thoughtful comment on something great that's happened to them, all of a sudden I'm back in their world. So I've enjoyed doing it that way.
I love that. No, that is really important. And I love that you made the connection to being back in their world, because we know that LinkedIn is showing us less and less of everything from our networks. And it isn't just because a lot of us have a lot of followers or don't. They're deliberately rigging the algorithm to only show us a little bit of stuff, which frustrates Ron and me for sure tremendously. But I love that you use that, because that substantive commenting will signal to LinkedIn, show me more. But you're right. I've noticed over and over again, things will appear and I'll think, oh, That's great that I found out what happened to Nicole. I didn't know where she ended up, and now I see that she's moved on from another job step. Thank you for that. That contribution's great. Ron, anything else? Yeah.
I'm muted again. I put in a little comment just because it illustrates the kinds of things that you and I, working as a team, find ourselves doing, where you're engaged in an element. And so, as a member of the team, then I might pick up the slack in a certain other way. So, this then is another way how it's a team sport sometimes. And I've actually seen that in other webinars and the like, where they have roles that are played, etc. In terms of here's some extra teaching, is if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're doing a presentation, here's some other examples of how you can use your expertise and things you've learned here to be a better co-mentor or whatever, co-presenter in a webinar.
And Peter just encouraged Nada through the chat, because Nada's been putting comments in that she needs to engage more on LinkedIn. Peter, you're exactly right. I do the same thing. If I'm sitting watching TV, or today I was waiting for a doctor's appointment, I'm going to get on the app and just look at things that I can comment on quickly, or I copy the link and then do it later. It doesn't take a lot of time, Nada and others, to do that. My old formula, which used to work until recently, is to be on LinkedIn 2 to 3 times a week. You used to be able to go through your whole feed in 5 to 10 minutes, scroll through, like things 4 times each time you're on, and try to do 1 comment each time you're on. So it was just a formula I came up. It worked. Don't feel wedded to it, but remember that at least liking signals to LinkedIn you want to see more posts. Apparently, from what Richard Vanderblom, he's a big expert on and has had a report for the last 3 years on the algorithm changes, and now it's changing so much they don't do one big report anymore. They do every couple months an update. He says that whether you choose insightful or is the same thing to LinkedIn. And I get so frustrated at that, because if I like a post, that's not the same as me saying, this is insightful. I use insightful for this is very helpful, something I'm going to use. I use support for someone who's having a rough time, or someone who gave me great information but doesn't necessarily move the dialogue along. Celebrate, that's clear. And I rarely use funny, but occasionally there's a funny thing that I'll use it for. Kira Fonseca, who does videos of what it's like. She does these satire 2-minute videos on what hiring managers and HR people are really think about the job process, and they're pretty funny. But I think you all have identified some really helpful things. You've all given each other help, which we all do. And that's why this chat box real estate is so valuable, and people forget about it. I am going to now open up the floor in case anybody has any other topic they want to talk about. Ron.
Yeah, it's actually just an extension of what we were talking about. We were talking about these, what some people are calling micro moments. Throughout our day, especially if you're a cell phone user, an iPad user, and the like, there are these micro moments where you're standing in line waiting for your coffee or something, and they're still preparing us. So you're scrolling through and doing things. And so these micro moments are becoming more and more important in life. And so those are the opportunities for you to be doing things. And it's also those kinds of reminders that says, oh, I got to do such and such. And then people go off and do that. And it's a very different way of seeing how we live in this kind of fast-paced, multitasking type world.
And related to that, what you're saying is these small moments stop us and give us a way to reflect, to learn, to stay engaged without going down the rabbit hole of I went looking for a document today, and a half hour later, I was still looking for it because I forgot and found something else that I needed. And yes, we've all done that, whether it's on our hard drive or whether it's on the huge internet. All right, if there's no last questions, which it doesn't look like there are, our next meeting is on the 13th. I forgot to look at the topic again. And Ron, I'll ask if you will close the meeting, please.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's actually interesting. We had a chance to actually emulate some of the information we're getting, and we used the chatbot rather well. I'm impressed with us. So thank you, everyone, for participating in the way you have. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So I'll be coming in from a different location
Right.
in Nova Scotia, and I expect to be in a week's time in Mexico. And so I'll be warmer than I am now. See you then.
All right. See you all later. Take care.